say everything's okay.
Hello, I'm Alana Levine, host of Little Known Facts. I've always been inspired by people who love what they do. On this podcast, I'm interviewing actors who you love to watch do what they love to do. Little known fact about my guest today, he had a Broadway-themed bar mitzvah, and he entered the reception singing Walk Like a Man with his dad and two brothers. Welcome, Ben Platt.
Everything's okay.
My guest today is star of stage and screen, Ben Platt. His stage career began when he was just a kid, playing roles in Caroline or Change, Cinderella, The Music Man, Mame, Into the Woods, Pippin, and Guys and Dolls multiple times, once in Hebrew. On Broadway, he has starred in The Book of Mormon and Dear Evan Hansen, for which he has won multiple awards. On film, he is famous for playing Benji Applebaum in the mega box office hits Pitch Perfect and Pitch Perfect 2, Ricky in the Flash, and the soon-to-be-released Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, and Drunk Parents, co-starring with Alec Baldwin and Selma Hayek. Welcome, Ben Platt, to the podcast. I'm so thrilled that you're here, my friend.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I think we just have to start off right away with a constant in my house, which is Pitch Perfect. Was that a hard part to get?
You know, not particularly as far as the process. It was a very run-of-the-mill situation. I was in my summer before going away to college. That was the plan. I was going to go to Columbia University here in New York City.
Oh, nice.
And about a month before I was supposed to leave, I was at a voice lesson with my teacher at the time, Eric Vitro in LA, and he said, "Are you going in for this college singing movie? All of my clients that are your age seem to be going in for this college singing movie." And I thought, well, that's interesting. No, I'm not. So I contacted my agents and I asked them about it, and they said, yeah, the script came across our desk, but there's you've been sort of typed out, essentially. It's not really a part that fits your mold. And I was like, well, it's about college kids that sing, so I think maybe I could find something. So why don't you send me the script? So they sent me the script, and
would it kill you? Really?
And then there was a character named Benji, and I was like, interesting, we share a name. What about this guy? To their credit, I had never really played sort of the outcast nerd, sort of social pariah character. That was kind of the beginning of that. Let me go and give this a shot. So I went in for the casting directors, was called back for the casting directors and Jason Moore, the director, and then a third time in a sort of pseudo-screen test for Elizabeth Banks and Jason and some of the Universal people. And then about 2 weeks before I was supposed to go to Columbia, was offered the role and decided to defer instead and to take my packed duffel bags to Baton Rouge, Louisiana instead of New York City.
Did you have to audition with any other actors, or were you always by yourself?
Always by myself, always just doing the scene where Benji meets the troublemakers at the activities fair. And so I just had to do that scene a bunch of times, and then I had to sing a few different songs in each audition. I just wanted to hear us a cappella sing a few things. I sang Feeling Good by Michael Bublé a few times. And then at my final audition, they said, why don't you sing it as if you've spent the whole movie trying to get into this group, and now finally this is your one chance, and you come on stage and you're very nervous, so start very slowly and then gain confidence as you go. And so I sang it sort of in the way that I sing Magic in Me in the movie, and then that kind of clinched it, and then there you have it.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank God for all of us, because it must be sort of a heady thing right out of the gate to be in something that is, for popular culture, just starting off with that. It's so huge.
It is crazy. I mean, I certainly had no idea this is what it was going to be. It was a small it was a studio film, but about as small as a studio film can be, pretty low budget, not a lot of famous people. I knew Anna Kendrick from Up in the Air, and Rebel Wilson was the really funny girl from Bridesmaids. And it was it was just like theater camp in Louisiana for 3 months, and it was a blast.
Heaven.
And truly heaven. And Skylar Aston was already a friend of mine from some theater workshops and things. And
Did you watch those High School Musical movies when they came out?
Did I watch those High School Musical? What do you take me for?
Sorry, let me rephrase the question. As I am someone who's watched every one of them, and also the behind the scenes of the making of them religiously. So for the making of Pitch Perfect, I would imagine it was similar in terms of how you learned all the numbers, right?
Very much so. And for me, I think that's why it was the perfect first on-screen foray, because I was really comfortable, because we had a rehearsal process in a rehearsal room with dancing and singing, and it was something I was so familiar with because I grew up doing musical theater. So to me, it felt so natural. And then to make that transition to my first job on camera, to be in such a comfortable space and have half the things I was doing on camera be things that are on stage was an excellent transition. And also to have Jason Moore directing, who's a wonderful theater director and could speak to me in a way that I really understood, was
You were
pretty
like,
perfect.
Jason, it would be easier for me, instead of saying like camera right or camera left, if you could say stage right and stage left, I think you'd get a great performance out of me.
Can we just have a small audience on hand just to offer reactions?
Speaking of a small audience, you would just have to have your family in the room, right? So for those of you who don't know, Ben grew up one of 5.
I did.
And his last name is Platt. And they were a family that loved musical theater so much that they would often be called by friends and family the Von Platt family.
Yes,
Correct?
indeed. Yes,
Correct.
the Von Platt family singers, if you will.
Oh, this night air is no good for the children's voices. This Malibu air is no good for the children's voices. We must get them
It's
inside
too
right
dry
away.
a climate in LA for the family to sing.
We must get them into the Alps. So this family's love for musical theater was born from where?
My parents, especially my father, grew up loving theater and directing shows in his backyard the way that I grew up, and just being obsessed with original cast albums and with just the beauty of Broadway. And his biggest dream has always been to create Broadway musicals. And so
And he fulfilled his dream.
he did fulfill his dream. He created a really small art show. It's called Wicked.
Okay, so your dad is Mark Platt, who has really helped form Broadway as we know it for
Yes,
the
indeed.
last...
From pretty early on, it was, well, first he was sort of an executive and a studio head, and it was always sort of a big picture kind of a guy. But to the question
Yes.
with musical
What
theater,
was my question?
100%, it was,
I'm sorry,
how
what?
did the love for musical theater start? So yeah, so
Yes.
he would play us in the car every day, and we would drive to lunch or something on the weekends. It wouldn't be the radio, it'd be the Gypsy Cast album or his workshop of Wicked or Tick Tick Boom. Or so like I just like grew up as that was my bread and butter. So
Right.
I just assumed. And they put me in theater when I was 6 years old. They put me in at the Adderley School for the Performing Arts in the Palisades, which is like a fun 12-week after-school program where kids put on some semblance of a musical.
What I found to be so remarkable is how incredibly down-to-earth and grounded you are.
Thank
And
you.
that's true of all of your siblings that I've had the pleasure to meet.
That's
and
my parents doing.
School me as a mother myself who wants to raise really good kids.
You have
like
wonderful
you.
children, and I strive to emulate your life.
Could you
because
say that
have a
just
beautiful-
one more time?
I-
Alana Levine has what?
Has wonderful children, and I strive to emulate her life.
Thank you.
Truly.
And we're done. That was so great. Thank you for coming on the show. This was amazing. Congratulations on Dear Evan Hansen.
Thank you. Goodbye.
It's a big hit. These are little known facts that now you know. Thank you.
Yes, you're
Thank
welcome.
you. It has to be slightly pitchy to be authentic. We could have done it not that way, but we got to give the people what they want, Platt.
So back to me being down to earth.
Yes. Yes.
No, but, you know, on one hand, I'm not a great example because I did grow up in the business. And so I was around these sort of like, let's say, people and
Yes.
famous folks, and grew up going to movie sets and premieres and things like that because just by virtue of who my father was. First
Why
of all,
aren't you in jail or on drugs right now?
because my family has a beautiful Jewish background. I think that's a big part of it. We were very grounded in our community, and our synagogue means a lot to us. And I went to Jewish day school all through 8th grade, and just growing up in a very sort of tight-knit, because LA is a very disparate place too, and I feel like it's easy for kids to feel like they don't sort of have their home base, whereas I almost think in New York it's a bit easier because it's a tighter place. And I don't know, it's, for some reason, maybe just because I didn't grow up here, but I always find it easier to like find your niche here. But anyways, because I lived in an area that was a lot of Jews who all went to the same synagogue and the same day school, I just grew up in a way that could be at once sheltered and also exposed to lots of great culture and art. And because
Right.
my parents were in the business, I got to see all sorts of things that expanded my mind. And yet I did get to live in somewhat of a Jewish, safe
A little
community.
shtetl
Buttle. Yes,
in the
a-
Pacific Palisades. Where did you grow up? What,
West,
in
like right near
Westwood?
UCLA.
Everything was shut down from Friday night sunset until
Except
until
for Pink
Havdalah. Did you ever have any concern being identified as too Jewish in this business? Did that ever happen to you?
You know, no. I think partially because a lot of people in this business happen to be Jewish, which is a wonderful thing. More so probably in... I know, I don't know. What are you talking about? But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that's part of what makes me like a sane and grounded and happy human being is my Jewish background.
So the characters, you were saying that earlier on when the part of Benji Applebaum came your way,
Sure.
your agents didn't immediately think of you as someone who was an outsider. But since then, you have played these really complex characters who very much feel like an outsider. Was there a time in your life where you felt that way?
The real answer is I feel like part of me feels too guilty to say that I ever did feel that way because I had a wonderful upbringing and I am very fortunate to have been in a loving family and to have been supported in every way I could have possibly wanted to be supported. So in any sort of deeply existential way, no, I did not feel like an outsider. But growing up as a kid who's around a bunch of boys who love to play sports and you want to go home and do a show in the backyard makes you sort of look inward a bit. So I think, if anything, that's the only jumping off point I have, is thinking like, I did like to spend a lot of time on my own in my own thoughts and in my own sort of creative world. And so I think I can relate to that part of it. As far as the inability to be social and interact, which is a lot of the characters that I've played have had, that's not something I've ever dealt with or had trouble with. I love to interact with people and be social and when I choose to be. But I can understand the desire to not do so, which is why I think I'm able to at least have a jumping off point that I can personally relate to, if not completely fabricate. But some parts I need to just sort of create.
So what is your process? How do you work on a part?
It definitely varies greatly depending on if it's a stage piece or if it's on film. I think Evan Hansen is what my mind is the most occupied with at the moment, and definitely the role that I've played that I've had the most time to develop because I have been with the piece for about 2.5 years since the very first table read, and so have somewhat collaborated with the writers to create this person from scratch. And so that's been different in a way that I've never experienced because it was such an open book. And so I was able to take seeds of an idea and see what really did feel honest to me and what felt effective to me, and then incorporate those things because they were organic to me, as opposed to taking things like with Elder Cunningham, the Book of Mormon, looking at a script and a role that had already been created and thinking there are, vital aspects of this that I must recreate, that I have to
Right,
to
right.
be
Because the
true
machine
to.
is in place already.
Exactly.
Right.
And I don't want to compromise the piece, but at the same time, what can I do to infuse it with myself and make it honest to me and make it organic and make it believable, because I'm not Josh Gad. So
Right.
I think it's really definitely varies.
Wait, I thought I was interviewing
I'm really
Josh Gad.
sorry. I'm so sorry to disappoint you.
Second time we have to stop.
I know.
It's a nightmare. All right. Well, Ben Plattberg, let's keep going. Let's keep going and see if we can find
Platschultz.
something to use from you, not being Josh Gad. Can you just talk a little bit about the theme of Dear Evan Hansen? What comes at you after the show, after you've given so much?
Certainly. So Evan Hansen, in a nutshell, is about an isolated kid who has a lot of crippling social anxiety and a lot of trouble connecting in a world that is currently very hyper-connected as far as being online and being able to share your thoughts and judge each other's thoughts instantaneously, which I think just kind of pulls him further and further into himself. And I'm not going to give away any of the plot, but it's essentially just sort of a really raw and real depiction of a kid who does not know how to get outside of himself and connect to people and wants nothing more than to do so. And so I think whether it's kids that come that are themselves dealing with social anxiety or are somewhere on the autism spectrum, or in the other side of things, kids that are seemingly on the outside very typical children who also just see themselves in him, I think it's just by virtue of the fact that the show so successfully depicts the current world and the fact that the character that we've been able to all create together feels like a person that everybody really knows or has met or can see themselves in.
Right.
People get very affected, and I think that anxiety specifically hasn't really been depicted this way in a musical before, and I think that anxiety is something that's pretty rampant right now with kids. I know that I've certainly deal with my share of anxiety, and so afterwards, as far as what you're saying about how I deal with the response, people feel a sort of ownership over the character and the experience that they've had and the emotional experience that they've had. And so when they meet me afterwards, they sort of expect some sort of button to that emotional journey or some sort of commiseration. And I want nothing more than to provide that for people. But sometimes by virtue of the fact that I'm an actor and I'm a happy person and I can leave the theater and be myself and not be lost in that emotional place,
Right.
it's sort of unsettling for people sometimes because they're like, wait, why aren't you
on
on
a
the
stretcher?
floor?
Right. Because something really horrible just happened to all of us. And
Exactly.
you're going to the Palm or Lobster. Social media is a star of this play as well.
Certainly.
I mean, sort of its role in our society. And I really loved coming away with, what are we winning? For your character, he actually won a moment of feeling, without giving too much away,
Certainly.
what it's like to be inside something,
Mhm.
right? Have you